effort to change that, Saperstein waged a friendly bet with Max Winter, the owner of the all-white Minneapolis Lakers of the NBL, the National Basketball League, the precursor to the NBA.
There were many of us who could not understand what the Globetrotters were trying to do being on the same floor with the mighty, powerful Minneapolis Lakers. It was going to be a mismatch.
The Globetrotters-Lakers game would not only prove which was the best team in the country, but also whether blacks and whites could coexist on the hardwood, a concept that had been put to the test a year earlier in New York.
There was what amounted to a race riot in Syracuse. A guy named Pop Gates, who played for the Globetrotters, was then playing for one of the NBL teams, and a guy named Chick Meehan for Syracuse, and they got into a big fight. And that particularly scared all the basketball promoters. And there was a general feeling like, even though Jackie Robinson had integrated baseball, even though the Cleveland Browns with Marion Motley had integrated football, basketball was a little different. You were close, you're wearing just uniforms. Race was more obvious in basketball.
While the racial subplot of the Trotters-Lakers game was only whispered, the headlines of the Times cried out. Chicago police were still searching for 6 white men who had beat a black man to death with a baseball bat.
And then on the very night of the game, Harry S. Truman made his speech on the necessity for racial equality in this country, and he promoted a new civil rights plan that was supposed to address the issues of racial separation and racial prejudice. And the Dixiecrats, the Southern Democrats, walked out of his speech. And he started that speech almost at the same moment the ball went up for the center tip for the Globetrotters-Lakers game.
I think the racial implications of the game grew in later years. I think at the time it was just another game of the Globetrotters against a white team. But what made this game special was George Mikan, who didn't go into the game overtly as the great white hope, but clearly he was shouldering that burden.
George Mikan in today's world is, Shaquille O'Neal, basically. George had a variety of shots, hook shots, left and right. This is the most dominant big man in the game type of thing where no one could stop him.
The game was so closely anticipated. They started lining up at 3 a.m. The mighty Minneapolis Lakers versus the Harlem Globetrotters. Showboats, yes, but were they good enough to be in the same gym with the Lakers? We thought not.
Another factor that's important, there were as many or more whites pulling for the Globetrotters in the stadium as there were anyone else. That illuminates the contradictions of American life.
And you could feel the vibrations in there. And they were quiet at first, but then as that game got on, you couldn't hear yourself talk. And I got nervous.
The Lakers jumped out to an early lead, but the Trotters fought back to tie the score. Then, in the fourth quarter of an already physical game, George Mikan and Marcus Haynes collided as they scrambled for a rebound.
I remember Mikan almost killed Marcus Haynes. They both went up for the rebound.
Marcus Haynes jerks at the ball to take it from Mikan's hands, and his hands slip off the ball.
Marcus came down on both elbows and on his back.
And you see Mikan on the floor following the course of the ball, and you see Marcus Haynes on the floor twisted in obvious pain. But then behind both of them is Irma Robinson pointing a finger at Mikan as if to say, it's his fault. This collision in this episode was his fault. But that moment in the game, when the two collide and when he falls on the floor, that's the moment where, if there's going to be racial violence, that's the moment in which it's going to occur.
It didn't. Nothing happened. Then, with 5 seconds left, and the score tied at 59 apiece, it was Irma Robinson who held the ball and the Globetrotters' fate in his hands.